Hey folks, thanks for joining me for this episode from the Embellish Pod. If you got here by chance, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button. Hopefully it can be found on any podcasting platform that exists. And if you can't find me on a platform, send me an email at embellishpod@gmail.com and I'll try to get that taken care of. You can also find video versions of this podcast on YouTube. You can find all of my links on Instagram at embellishpod or TikTok with the exact same handle. I have a website. It is www.embellishpod.com. It's a place to pick up these links, episode details, and more. Today I have the folks from JT Meleck joining me, and we're going to talk a little bit about rice whiskey, a little bit about farming, and a little bit about everything else. Hope you guys enjoy. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happen to be consuming this particular episode. Today, I have Mike joining me from JT Meleck. Mike, I want to give you an opportunity to do number one. Tell me how to pronounce your last name. I'm from Western Kentucky, and we don't always get it right. I have a feeling it's probably Fruge or Fruge, but I'll let you kind of tell me that, and then kind of give me the background of how JT Meleck became a thing.
Yeah, it's Fruge, and there's an accent over the E, so that's how you get that done. We're from South Louisiana, part of Cajun country, and yeah, definitely of French descent.
All right, now tell me about this. So just tell me about JT Meleck, right? Where does this come from, right? Because you guys are our rice farming family to begin with, and then you kind of moved into this distillation thing, right? How do you kind of transition that lifestyle?
Well, it's still a work in progress. You know, I'm a farmer, and somehow we accidentally got into distillation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm fourth generation, and we got fifth and sixth generation on the ground, so to speak. And we were looking for, like, what's the future? We raised crawfish. That was sort of my brother and I's big thing. That's what we focused on for the last 40 years. And I could see that sort of maturing out. Not that we're out of business by any means, but lots of people do that. It's not unique anymore. What's the next thing? And it's been a journey. 7 years later. I mean, I don't know how deep you want me to go into the story, but I could spend about 30 minutes on this. But
You can go as deep as you want to. That's what we're kind
so
of here for. We're here for the nitty gritty of it.
so if you're a farmer, you'll understand that commodities go up and down and they crash, and there are situations where you could be ready to plant the crop and there's no way you're going to make a profit, but you still have to plant the crop. And that's kind of complicated as to why you would do that. But needless to say, it's the life of a farmer. And we were facing one of those situations 7-8 years ago. And I'm trying to have a conversation with my brother, telling him we can't plant the rice crop. It's so bad. There's no way this is going to work. And my brother is like a lot of farmers. Thank goodness for him. Farmers are going to plant. That's what they do. They're wired that way. And I got frustrated, and so I just really started looking all over the place, casting a wide net, and I somehow ended up at the ADI conference in Baltimore that year. I believe that was 2017, and started asking people about rice because I wanted to know how much rice it would take to make a bottle of vodka. Like, literally, that's how basic this started. I knew absolutely nothing about it. But constantly, everyone I talked to said they never heard of rice. Don't know anybody doing rice. Everybody's doing corn, wheat, barley, but nobody knows anything about rice. And, I started, well, wonder why? Why not? And the more I researched it, I realized, it's an Asian product. It's made into 100 different products in Asia, but it just never made it over. And I just sort of put two and two together. The rice industry in America really didn't come of age until the late 1800s. And then Prohibition comes along and sort of, if anybody understands early distillation in America, is brought over by the Scots, and then it's a farmer-driven industry. It's only post-Prohibition that, it got consolidated, let's say. So anyway, rice never happened in the American style, or so I believed. And I'm pretty sure I'm accurate because I said, well, if I'm going to do this, I want to make an American rice whiskey. I want to make a really good one. And we're going to find out if that's possible. And we tested, and we made a spectacular vodka. 2 years later, we won the ADI show, like the whole thing. The one that I was at 2 years previous. I said, well, that's a pretty good start. And we were already filling barrels, and it's just fortunately I was at a position, this is pre-COVID, our other businesses were doing very well, and we could afford to take a chance on this, and we sank a lot of barrels. We had good advice, and the product started coming along, and I didn't know what I was tasting because I didn't know what good or bad was. I'm just
Mhm.
being completely transparent here. I'm not the master distiller. I just had some hunches on what would work. I'm a cook. Everybody in South Louisiana cooks, or at least, the deer camp or whatever, and we're
Mhm.
always cooking. If you cook, then you know different varieties of rice taste different, although everyone else might think they're all the same. Well, they're not remotely the same. And so I took that knowledge and had some hunches, and we turned out, our ferments were really good. Our distillate coming off the still was exceptional, and we really just felt like we had something. Like, if it's this good now, imagine what it's going to be like when it comes out of the barrel. And as the barrel progressed, I had some other good advice, because about 2 years in, when the heavy tannins hit that distillate, I was about to jump off the roof. I was in full blown panic. Like, this stuff, I've made way too much of it, and it's not going to be any good. And had some good coaches, and the guy was, if I'm gonna name names, Dave Shurik, who was kind of one of the not founders, but he's the head guy at Woodford when they first started, when it was really crafty. He was kind of coaching me along, and I remember him saying it real calm. He said, "Mike, you got a good, clean distillate. Just have to be patient."
Mhm.
And so I did, and at about 3 years, we could see that we sort of thought we had something, and then 4 years, we released our first small batch. I think it kind of hits its peak, somewhere around 4.5, 5 years for that small batch, and then it gets into a real serious, real deep, big boy whiskey at about 6 years old,
Mhm.
and we're going to see what happens at 8. Next year we'll have an 8 year. I don't know if we'll release it or not. It's still experimental as far as going that far out. But we're everything's, I call us obsessively authentic. There's no product to be bought like this at any big barrel house. You can't buy it, you can't source it, you can't blend it. You got to make it. And fortunately for us, it's turned into a magnificent spirit. I don't know if you're familiar with our single barrel program, but
Mhm.
my daughter was kind of leading that for a period of time, and she was magnificently successful with that, and just really getting a lot of key people tied into it. I mean, it doesn't hurt that the whiskey is spectacular, but it's kind of where we are right now in the game of things. In the middle of that, everybody's going through COVID, post-COVID whiskey glut. I'm thankful that I'm making something a little different, so I got a
Mhm.
little bit different story to tell. But it's still a tough market out there. We don't have a tasting room because we're literally in the middle of nowhere, out on the farm, and I think we could probably be successful with that now because we got enough brand recognition, but I think it would take our focus off of the shelf and building out the brand, and distribution. That's kind of where we are.
Yeah. And you said a lot of things there, and I'm gonna kinda
Yeah,
go
I
backwards
kind
on
of
a few
rattle.
things.
I can ramble on. Let me
Yeah.
tell you.
No, 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 no. It's perfect. You gave me a lot of I'm gonna abandon my question sheet over here and move to the one that I generated based off of what you were already talking about.
Uh-huh.
And, you were kinda talking about when you hit that 2-year time frame where the tannins kinda bloomed into it and you panicked. A
Yeah.
little bit. I think, there may be some benefit in coming from a farming background, right? Because once you put the seed in the ground, you just sort of figure out what's going to happen at the end of the year, and whether it looks great in June or July, what's going to be harvested is what's going to be harvested. And so sometimes you kind of come out the other side a lot better than you think you will, kind of in the
Mhm.
middle of this, and you mentioned that we're also facing a really kind of maybe a tough whiskey marketplace. And, you guys have been farming for a long time. You farmed through the 80s. So you're going to be kind of aware of what this next little bit is like. But you mentioned that you guys do crawfish farming as well as rice. Now, if I were to think in farming terms, was crawfish the primary crop with rice being a subsidiary crop to it? Were they kind of two equals, or did you start farming rice and say, "Hey, we have an opportunity to do crawfish as well"? Kind of how does that blossom out a little bit?
Rice was first.
Hmm.
Rice has been part of South Louisiana. There were huge investments into rice farming from all over the country, big money that came in there in the late 1800s, bought up land. So rice has been around. Rice and sugarcane are really the only two ground crops that have done well in our climate. Everything else has been tried. A little bit of soybeans are grown, but we just don't get the yields that
Mhm.
you get everywhere else. And so you mentioned the 80s. The 80s were terrible for farming,
Mhm.
all across the country. That's when people were driving their tractors to this, US cattle and stuff. My dad went broke during that time period. We had leased out the farm to another farmer. He was farming. My brother and I were in college. We were working for minimum wage, and crawfish farming was in its not beginning. Like we weren't the first, but we were definitely part of the pioneers who
Mhm.
decided that we were going to take it seriously and make a living from it. And the two crops go together. It's a cycle. The same piece of ground that's a rice field the first year becomes a crawfish pond the next year. The practices, I don't think we want to get too deep into farming practices, but requires you to have bigger levees and hold deeper water and things like that. We figured all that out. My brother and I started all that, like I said, when we were in college. We were both working for minimum wage, and this seemed like a better deal, and it was, but it wasn't. We didn't inherit it. It wasn't a surefire deal. We started selling our crop on the road, literally me in a pickup truck and driving to Dallas, Texas and developing a market there. And that's kind of how I ended up in distillation because I got exposed over years. Fruge Crawfish became Fruge Seafood Company, which
Mhm.
services about 500 restaurants throughout Texas. And they tend to be high end restaurants. We work with a lot of chefs, and you get exposed to that creative side. And we watched a lot of people who we knew, just regular Joes, become super successful by building out brands. And we were always a commodity, like we were just another fish with a price. And so that led to us looking to build a brand, and that's how we ended up doing this.
Mhm.
I don't know if that answered your question, but
No, no, it definitely did, and I don't want to dive too deep into the crop side of it. Obviously, I mean, I could personally. I work in ag tech as my day job,
I was
but
about to say if you knew about the 80s, you had to know something about ag.
yeah, I've been around this for a little while. But you mentioned, it's a cyclical farming, and most people are moderately familiar with crop rotation. Is the benefit of going, rice after crawfish? Is there, is there some sort of a restorative nature that the crawfish bring to the land? I think about one of my former bosses. He actually irrigated his corn off of a catfish pond. So he sold the catfish, but then he pulled the super nitrogen rich water off the bottom of the pond to throw onto his corn, which increases yields. I wonder, is there any benefit to putting the crawfish in? Does it make your rice harvest more robust? Kind of what's the benefit there,
Well,
or is there?
you didn't ask this question, but we're basically making fertilizer with our leftover distillate leavings, if you will. That we separate out as much as we can the solids coming off the still, and we have to hold the rest of the water, and we use that water then to pump into the rice fields, and it you can see that it's a fertilizer.
Hmm.
We didn't intend that to happen, but that's what happens. But back to your question, rice is we grow the rice as a crop for a profit as much as possible, and then we harvest the grain. But then rice has the ability to make a second crop, and we encourage that, and we encourage as much biomass as possible, and we're creating an environment where crawfish then can sort of multiply. They're indigenous, they're there anyway, but not in commercial quantities, and we just enhance that, and you know
Hmm.
let it go from there. The crawfish, I wouldn't say restore the land, but they give it a break. You can't go either way. You can't go back to back to back rice or crawfish. You need to rotate back and forth. We find that to be the best solution. Although in some years, not to get too technical, but we'll grow just what we call a green rice program. We're not trying to harvest the grain. We're just growing it for the crawfish. But you can't do that. You're kind of pushing it when you do that. You'll eventually stall out. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and now kind of moving back a little bit towards the whiskey here, it feels like, at least Most farmers that I interact with, they're always looking for another way to go to market with their crop, right? And so if
Right.
you're farming rice, obviously table rice is a really easy path to market, but it probably is also a really crowded path to market.
Yes.
Whereas rice whiskey, at least in the United States, was largely a novelty. I know, a handful of large legacy distillers did some experimentations with adding rice whiskey into their existing blends about 10 or 15 years ago, but nobody was really diving in, so to speak. But, you kind of found this thing 8 years ago that you wanted to kind of dive into. And, you know, is there anything that's sort of surprising, right? So you came from a seafood business background, a rice business background. Now you're moving into whiskey. I mean, I can't imagine those three things cover like a lot of the same ground, but what's,
They do. You'd be surprised. I mean, the way you go to market, you have to have a sales team, you have to have a
Mhm,
sales force on the ground. So knowing how to, if you can sell fish, you can go and present whiskey to retailers. So
mhm,
there's a lot of vertical integration, if you will. But what's surprising, I guess, is that rice, when you first say rice to the newcomer, it's not a positive. We have to get past that, which I obviously thought it would be the opposite. It would be interesting and new and different. Otherwise, it might have been a, consideration. But I mean, you say rice and people say sake or something
mhm,
like that. It's just we've learned that to be a fact of nature. But I would getting into the spirit itself, we've done enough blind tastings to know that where we stand, our whiskey drinks like a bourbon, a little bit
mhm,
sweeter, but it'll stand up in any blind you want to put it in. It doesn't matter who you put up there. I guarantee you it's going to come out number one or two. I'm not just saying that. Not too many people can say that.
mhm,
It's a real thing. It's got this softer palate and a slightly more sweeter profile, and it doesn't have the kind of bite you in the head burn. And people notice that right away. It doesn't matter who they are or where you go. Done it across the country with friends, and sharing. Not in a or just going out in the market when we were
mhm.
first introducing it. So if you like bourbon, you're gonna love our rice whiskey. If you're more into single malt, you might say, "Well, it's a little too sweet," or whatever you're gonna say. I don't know. I kind of got stuck there, but
Yeah, no, you're
that's kind of the
perfectly fine.
profile. The nose is. I just love it. Everybody's got their own interpretation of what they're smelling and what they're tasting. When you start getting into the details of the palate and all that, I just like it. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah, and I'll agree on a couple of different things that you said in there. First of all, it is a really really good aged spirit. I obviously haven't had any unaged of what you guys have done, and a lot of the people that I have kind of bumped into found you guys through that single barrel program that you were talking about. Your daughter helped develop. A couple years ago, there was a lot of really phenomenal whiskeys that surprised a lot of people, especially in blinds, because you are 100% right. If you put an aged rice whiskey in front of bourbon nerds, they're immediately going to turn their noses up at it. And some single malt nerds, right? Because they're all the same kind of person. They just have a different favorite spirit. But
Mhm,
if you put it in front of them blind, the reaction is incredibly different, right? And
mhm.
that's maybe the hill that you guys have to climb as a part of your market creation. Is there anything specifically that you've tried to do to be able to kind of get past that initial nerd rejection that some folks might have, or that market bias that exists against it, or is it just keep your head down and keep working?
I wish there were a magic bullet. I haven't found it yet.
Hmm.
We are, probably within the first month of us going to market, I was lucky to have this consultant who was part of another small craft distillery who had some success. And, I said, "What's the secret? How do you do it?" Yeah. I got 100 questions. She said, "No shortcut, lick of the lips."
Hmm.
I've heard it 100 times since then. You got to get people to try it. And in our case, if you're up against that, as you called it, nerdy crowd, you might want to do it blind. I've gone to bourbon groups, like, little afternoon gatherings of 10 or 15 people, and reaction is always the same. You walk in there, you say, "This is rice whiskey," you put it in the middle of the table, and we're just talking about a group of guys, right? Nothing official, very relaxed, and they're all kind of like, pause.
Yeah.
They look at the bottle, they kind of look at each other. Nobody wants to be the first one. And then you just sort of watch it slowly bloom.
Mhm.
One guy tries it and he's, man, you need to try this.
Mhm.
And it just kind of works its way around the table. And then 2 weeks later, you're getting text messages and emails and like, where do you find this stuff? How do you get more of it? But whew, that's a long process. Very
Very manual labor
and labor
intensive,
intensive.
right? It
My
feels,
my daughter had developed a term for it. She called it the Meleck lean because she'd do these tastings, and of course, people would be all hesitant, like I just described, and then they'd take a little sip and they go, kind of back up. Wait, they cock their head to the side. They go, wait, this is rice. The way she did it was hilarious. Yes, it's rice and it's spectacular. You just need to try it. And,
yeah.
I, you know, if you know me, you would know that I'm like obsessively authentic and obsessively humble. So for me to just like step out there and tell you, look, dude, this, like I just know I've tried it enough times. I've tested it. You can't hold back when you're promoting your product because
Mhm.
somebody else is going to jump in front of you and change the stories. So when I get the opportunity to let people know it's good, like I want them to know emphatically, it's not
Mhm.
just another, in a long list of, and we don't come out with a new bottle a month. There's
Mhm.
not a different version with we don't have all those options when you're just blending. If you understand what I mean, like every decision we made 5 years ago. We don't get to pick up the phone. Man, I need a whatchamacallit with a whatchamacallit, and I'm gonna come
Mhm.
up with a new label and just look. And look, it works because people want the new label. I'm not begrudging that. I just don't have that option. So we're focusing on age statements right now, the barrel program, and we might do some micro blending to engage the public more, some really small batches, and that's kind of where we're at. This I mean, for me to do finished product, I literally have to dump good whiskey that I know is really good into another barrel and
Mhm.
experiment again. I'm not in a hurry to do that.
Yeah, and you mentioned your authenticity, right? And you
Right.
said something way earlier that validates when you say, you're kind of humble and authentic and you want to make sure that you're, making the good decisions. You guys have a release of 6 year that's coming out that you want that to become kind of a more regular release, but you've got to make sure that you've got enough good age product. But you kind of slid in there that you're going to be able to taste some 8 year, and you said if it comes out, right? And most brands will say it is going to come out. You're just saying, hey, if the flavor's right, then it comes out. If it's not, then it doesn't come out, right? And
Uh,
that's a
yeah,
good amount of authenticity.
I don't ever want like we could have released our first small batch of 3 years. It was good
Mhm.
enough, but it wasn't great, and we didn't. And I have a bourbon. We made a bourbon. I don't
Mhm.
like it. I'm probably not ever going to release it. It's good.
Mhm.
It's just not spectacular. And everything we've done so far has been spectacular. And I don't think that we can afford to be average and still be certainly a regional, if not a national consumer brand. I mean, we're a long way from either of those, but we have to get there for this to be relevant to our farm, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
No, no, it definitely does, and I want to kind of maybe take a little bit of a turn and think about, we've been talking about the spirit that you're making and kind of the ages that exist for it now. You mentioned you
Mhm.
had a bourbon. You're in Louisiana, which is not necessarily known for aging whiskey. How do you guys go about aging? Do you use normal size format? Do you use full size format barrels, half size barrels? Is it a blended approach? What does your aging program and your barrel program look like?
Well, to answer the question quickly, we're using a full size barrel, a 53 gallon, but we didn't start there. We started with a 25.
Hmm.
I'm sorry, we started with 5 gallon barrels, which lasted about 6 months. And then our first ever commercial batch was a 30-gallon barrels. And fortunately, I got fussed at I was dealing with a small family owned cooperage, and the guy was grouchy and he didn't want to make the 30-gallon barrel. So he started
Hmm.
fussing at me on the phone and asking me why I wasn't using a real whiskey barrel. And that really was the impetus of us changing to the 53. And it was, call it lucky or a very good decision because it just finishes out better. Then the 30-gallon barrels were really sought after. There's a certain group of people who really chase that. bottle, and I understand why, but it's not a it's just it's again, it's a very complex, what I
Mhm.
call big boy whiskey, but I don't think it fits the general public profile.
Yeah, it's not a mass market release, but it is definitely
Correct,
something that
and,
that
which I mean, we have to sell whiskey, we can't just make
yeah,
perfection. You know?
yeah.
So,
It's not UNICEF, right? This
yeah,
is a
that's correct.
for-profit business that has to be
Yeah,
able to
yeah,
meet its sales
yeah.
revenue goals.
But back to, I do wanna throw something in there.
Mhm,
So, I always tell this story. People told us, like, "I don't think you can age whiskey in Louisiana," and this and that and the other, and I read a lot. That's how I educate myself, and so
mhm,
I read all these books. I read the history of whiskey and how it came up to the States, and basically, the heart of American whiskey production came from post-revolution farmers who
mhm,
settled in the Ohio Valley, and if you understand how that worked, you grew a crop, you ate it, you fed it to the animals, you made some beer. When the beer went bad, you distilled it, you put it in a barrel because you were just trying to store it, not because
mhm,
you were trying to put a profile on it. And then you traded with it, and it ended up in New Orleans. So it was being aged in Louisiana a long time ago. The whole industry developed around that cycle. So somewhere along the way, they started realizing the longer you leave it in the barrel, the better it gets. It's not fit to drink when you
mhm,
when you first make it. So I was fairly confident that we were going to be successful aging it here. We get a lot of heat, and fortunately, we still get enough cold
mhm.
to squeeze the barrel, as I call it. It's a real thing. There's a dramatic transition of the barrel every year about February or March that, I mean, you can just I mean, you taste it in January, you taste it 2 months later, it's a different whiskey. We've, been very fortunate to have it work out. It was just a hunch and a guess, when we first started.
Yeah, and I live in the very far western end of the Ohio Valley, so we're pretty
Mhm,
aware of where a lot of our,
mhm.
both legitimate and illicit whiskey might have gone in a barrel
Yeah,
at some point in time, right?
right.
And it's interesting to hear, and I hadn't kind of thought about it in that context yet of, most of our whiskey was heading down the Mississippi. I can be at the Ohio or the Mississippi within about 45 minutes for either one. A lot of our whiskey was going down there to begin with. That's where it kind of began its aging process, just because that's how the market worked, not because we were trying to achieve anything very, very specifically.
Right.
And I guess you've sort of charted out kind of this new path, right? And so you have this rice whiskey that is aging in Louisiana, which is not necessarily as well researched of what's going to happen over time. Have you kind of come across anything that was, maybe unique to the aging process that exists in Louisiana? Or has it still kind of fit a similar curve, maybe slightly accelerated because it is more warm in Louisiana than Kentucky on a regular basis?
I think our angel share is higher.
Mhm,
I don't think, I know it is. That's probably the biggest reason why larger producers they figured all that out.
mhm,
They're all about yield. In our case, it's about, can we make it here? So we
mhm,
got to accept the yield. It's not a dramatic difference, but if you're running big operations, you would consider moving somewhere else. But we want to make it here. We want to make it on the farm. We want to make something unique. And like I said, it's a generational thing. It's tied to the farm. And by the way, the brand JT Meleck is us. It's our whole family story. John Meleck was my great uncle. He came over from Germany, and with his brothers and sisters, they settled on the farm. He was my grandfather's, I guess, favorite uncle, paternal father, if you will. Not real father, but that's who he saw him as. And I'll probably take it way more or whatever. I'm too emotionally attached to it. This is not just it's not a car dealership. I don't know
mhm,
how to explain that, but it's what we are. It's
mhm,
the whole family story. We were recently featured on the Cowboy Channel. If anybody cares to go look that up,
mhm.
and they did an hour-long feature on us, along with I think 12 other family farms across America. It's like, can you make a living farming? Was kind of the
Mhm.
backstory, and they did an extremely good job of capturing who we are. I'll just throw that in there as an aside.
And that's an interesting question. Can you make a
I
living
think I got
farming?
off track. What was your
No, no, no,
question?
no, no. You're perfectly fine. We're going down the right path. And like I said,
All
you
right.
you posed a real interesting question of can you make a living farming, and it depends on what year it is, really, more than
Yeah, it
anything,
depends on what
maybe.
year it is.
And, in at least within the farming community, there's a large degree of maybe responsibility, ownership, and romanticism on kind of ownership, right? Your
Mhm.
family farm is a very personal piece of who you are. Any
Right.
brand that carries a family name is a very important piece of it, and so you wanna be a good steward of it. You wanna shepherd it appropriately and make sure make the right decisions. And at least for the last handful of years, you guys have been, what feels like conservative with your distribution, and we haven't really talked about that. So where can you acquire, bottles of JT Meleck?
We are all over Louisiana and just about any retailer. We're in most of the specs in Texas and sort of being redistributed into other retailers there. We're in Goody Goody and I think Lone Star Liquor, or at least soon to be. We were in we, the distribution world is chaotic and it's hard to find a good fit.
Mhm,
And when you do, I mean, I'm just being straightforward. You're lucky if you get it delivered. You have to do the work. So, I mean, I'm getting off track. So we're in Texas,
mhm,
soon to be in all the retailers. We're in Arkansas with full distribution, but I don't know how much coverage they get. They don't move a lot of product up there. And then we're online at Bourbon Outfitters. We're also available anywhere that LibDib distributes if you're a retailer and you're familiar with that. So we're definitely in California, Pennsylvania, Florida, and it seems like I'm leaving one out. But check out LibDib if you're a retailer. You can get
mhm,
it direct if we're approved in that state. That's obviously a smaller program, but we're not being conservative with our distribution. I mean, we'd like to be in 48 states if we could, but the reality of getting there and then supporting it, if you can't afford to put boots on the ground, I don't think he should be there. Everybody that's in the business knows that's an extreme challenge. So you got to be conservative. You don't want to get out over your skis and trip up. Texas for us, we've been extremely successful beyond what we could ever hope for with getting in the specs. They have us in prime locations, but that it's not a slam dunk. You still got to get behind it, and you still got to get over there, and you got to support it and do the tastings, and you got to build a team.
mhm.
So this all takes time and money.
Yeah, the three-tier system's a really confusing process, right? Because what you mentioned is you've gotta get distribution, but then you still need someone to represent the product on the ground, which, if you've got an intermediary between you and the retailer, you would imagine there's gonna be some degree. There's not, largely, at least unless you're maybe a national brand and
Yeah.
not kind of
One
getting.
one thing, let me jump back in there. I don't want to forget to say this in case I didn't. If you're an independent person in another state, online Bourbon Outfitters, if they ship to
Mhm,
your state, that's
yeah,
the primary way that most people have been getting the product. I think it's technically this morning, maybe out of stock, and I'm working on getting that
mhm,
cleared up. But they also do some of our private barrel picks. So when we have done private groups and we invite those to connect with us, by the way. We got a limited number of those we do a year, but we have done them for, groups out in California or wherever. I don't know how they manage to physically get the bottles, but they do, and it's all
right.
legal. I'm not shipping direct. They figure it out, or we work through Bourbon Outfitters.
Yeah. And you mentioned kind of not getting out over your skis, which is a
Mhm.
big deal, right? For at least for kind of growing brands to not jump into a market and then not be able to support it with volume because, just say, randomly you hop into the Montana market and all of a sudden Montana market wants to consume more than the Texas market, right? How do you kind of evenly distribute what you have a finite amount of product that you can kind of get out there? Um,
Well, I could be wrong, but we've never had that problem.
right.
I don't think that's a problem that many craft distillers have faced.
Hmm.
Unless you somehow, get the right publication at the right time. But, even the small craft distillers that you heard about who were blenders or whatever you want to call it, struck it rich, they, I don't want to get into the details of
Hmm.
that, but they're pumping money into the distributor. They're making the brand go, you got to have a
Yeah.
lot of capital to do that, to go
Right.
that path. We don't have that. We're producing real risky on a real farm
Hmm.
with real people. It's not just a flip, if you will. And so that takes longer, if you understand what I mean. I mean, I'd love to have that problem that we don't have enough product to get out there. I guess I'd say that, but on the other hand, like, we last year, probably, I mean, we had, I don't know how many single barrels we had available,
Mhm,
and we could have sold 10 times that much.
mhm,
There was just this frenzy for it, and, it was actually turned into a negative in my opinion, because then the retailers who wanted it thought we were holding out on them, and
mhm.
then they don't wanna support the brand. I mean, I'm talking about local people that we know. Uh, "Who's
Yeah,
happy today?" That's all I could ask, you know?
yeah,
How do you make
I've got a
everybody
friend that
happy?
works for a
And then
brand that does
by
almost
next year,
exclusive.
we'll have too much, and then they're like, "Where?" You know,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, I have a friend who works for a brand that is almost exclusively single barrels, and
Uh-huh.
the list of people that want them and the list of people that are allowed to get them, man, that's a difficult thing to manage because exactly right, you've got a list, you put them in order of people that requested them, but your friend is the 75th person on the list, and you can either move them ahead and they're your friend, they're your local retailer, or you can do the right thing and manage it the way it was, and they're going to probably get pissed off, and
Yeah.
it's a nightmare to deal with. That's a thing that you guys have to kind of walk through. And you mentioned you would like to see this grow into kind of a national brand or whatever. What does it look like? How can you get to a national brand concept from where you are? What does that mean for your rice crop? Right? Are you using 100% of your rice crop for whiskey? Are you using a portion of it? Do you eventually kind of hit the point where we've used 100% of our rice crop, now we have to find more to make whiskey? Like, what does that look like? That's a big, broad question. Sorry, but
Well, I mean, and, so, I mean, supply is only a problem from the extent that you need to make it 5 years in advance.
hmm
We have enough rice, and we're not even using 10% of what we produce, and I'm in the middle of a rice country, so I could contract with my neighbors, and they would happily grow rice for me at a premium. So, supply is not the problem. It's, it's marketing. It's back to boots on the ground, converting consumers. I think we have been extremely successful with the bourbon enthusiast crowd,
hmm
stuff like this podcast. I mean, they love the product. I told you about all the blind tastings, but for a brand to be successful, it's got to make a leap to everyday consumer. Just the unless you can, like, continuously come out with something new, but even that I don't think lasts forever. I mean, how many labels do you need of the same brand? You
hmm
understand? Like, I don't want to get too whole idea behind that, and I don't want to kill the idea of all those different varieties. But I always said we got to get to the deer camp.
hmm
And you understand what I mean by that? Louisiana's a camp culture, and there's 20 guys who gang up, and they all go to the camp on the weekend. It might be the fish camp, the deer camp, or whatever. Louisiana has a camp culture, and they're all bringing a bottle.
hmm
And don't try to change that bottle. You know, if they drink Miller Lite, that's what they drink. Don't give them something else. So that's the challenge.
hmm
You gotta convince them that what you have is better, and get them behind it, and that takes time. And I don't have the answer to that. If I did, you know, we'd already be doing it, and we'd be in more states. My friendly assistant, my wife, just handed me a note. It says the LibDiv is in California, Florida, Pennsylvania, and New York. So I left
hmm
New York off the list. On regular distribution, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Texas. And Arkansas, we're with Central, and in Texas, we're with Greenlight. If there are retailers out there who want to know, in Louisiana, we're with RNDC.
You mentioned getting into deer camp, and deer camp culture isn't as strong in Kentucky as it is in Louisiana. I've got several coworkers that live in the state, and whether it's deer camp, duck camp, fish camp, they're all kind of the same people. And you're exactly right. They've got these consumer habits, and likely, if they drink Miller Lite, it's probably because their dad drank Miller Lite, and because his
Mhm.
dad may have drank Miller Lite. I think the only way you break that cycle is you find a generation where you can kind of wedge your way in and say, all right, hey, try this other thing.
Yeah.
But if you were to kind of paint the picture of the ideal JT Meleck consumer, right? Is it just everyone, or do you have kind of a person that you're like, this is the idea of a human being that we're trying to put it in their hands as a primary consumer?
Well, I wish we were that sophisticated that we had done all this market research and really identified that person. But I'll tell you this: we haven't focused on this, but women like our whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
like across the board. Can't tell maybe because it's smoother, that's what they call it. I don't
Mhm,
call it that, but but anybody that I mean, any consumer of whiskey is a potential,
mhm,
I really, you know, we we love and need the bourbon enthusiasts, but there's only a limited number of those people.
mhm.
So we've got to cross over to get to I don't know what you want to call them, but Joe Public, I mean, I call it the deer camp. I just mean where friends gather.
Right.
They're going to bring their favorite thing and they're going to consume it. And the bourbon enthusiasts, they're going to bring something new every couple of weeks because they're
Mhm.
looking for that. That's that's the whole point. They want to experience a lot of different things. But we're not going to be. I don't know that we'll ever be Jack Daniels or Coca Cola, but,
Right.
we've gotta find that niche or that consumer that, regularly brings it home.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you're chasing an ever-changing market, and, that becomes a big we're talking about whiskey, and we haven't mentioned vodka since the beginning of the
Yeah.
podcast, but vodka almost carries the brand because
Mhm.
those people are consistent.
Yeah.
Once they convert, that's it. They drink JT Meleck. You know, the vodka people are not looking for, they're probably drinking something else, and then you convert them, and then that's good. They're good with that. They like it better, and they're gonna stick there.
Mhm.
They're not looking for a new one next week. So,
Yeah.
I don't think I answered your question because we don't totally have the answer. We spend a lot of time on social media. We spend a lot of time doing things like this, podcasts, working with influencers. I don't know that you can buy your way into the market unless you can spend a bunch of money with the distributors and the
Mhm.
way that works. And I won't get into that because I don't want to tarnish myself. But it's just a challenge. There's no, I said this earlier in the cast, you have to get people to taste it, liquor to lips, and I haven't found a shortcut. So
Mhm.
it's just very manual, a lot of, whatever repetitions of that. And, we could go deep into it, but probably took Tito's like 20 years to become an overnight success. There's legendary stories about, them almost going out of business or being broke
Mhm.
or I don't you don't know what's
Yeah.
true, but you definitely what's true is they were definitely around a long time
Mhm.
before they, got somewhere.
It's funny that you mentioned Tito's because when you mentioned vodka earlier, that was the first thing that my brain went to is, I had a friend in college and Tito's was her vodka, period. And if you
Mhm.
suggested something else, she was pretty close to wanting to fight you over it, right? Tito's was her vodka,
Yeah,
and vodka people feel like they may be more brand loyal than maybe even your Budweiser, your Miller Lite drinkers, right? Because a Budweiser drinker is going to drink Budweiser, but if he's out somewhere and somebody's like, I don't have any, but I got some Miller over here, that's okay. Whereas she was going to say, no, go find some damn Tito's because Tito's is the answer for her. And it makes sense to kind of go for that to be a big part of the business. And I wonder because, at least from what I've seen, consumption trends are starting to change. The younger generation is not as interested in a lot of different spirits or consuming at a high level, but they are more interested in maybe cocktail culture or having one special drink every so often. Do you think that benefits a brand like JT Meleck that has a pretty significant vodka offering here, where you can kind of lean into whether it be restaurant culture, cocktail culture, whatever else? Because aged spirits are what the nerds are after, but that's not a volume business in the same way.
right. Is that a question you mean?
Yeah, I guess more like yeah, do y'all lean into the cocktail culture side of things at all? Is that a direction you plan to go? That kind of thought.
I mean, we're focused on whiskey,
Hmm.
but we had a very surprising success, at least locally in Louisiana, with our vodka.
Hmm.
Well, every craft distiller releases a clear spirit because if you know the way it works, it takes about 30 days to produce as opposed to aging it for 5 years. So we were out there testing the market and it just blew up. If you want to
Hmm.
talk about the proverbial, hitting the home run, what you talked about earlier, uh, where we didn't have enough, that was vodka. But
Hmm.
then COVID kind of crushed all that.
Hmm.
Because our method to market was the retailer, the in-store displays and tastings. I mean, that's
Hmm.
what we were doing, just hand to mouth. And it was working and it was spectacular. And the case count was through the roof. And then COVID hit. And then we still have not recovered from that because nobody wants to go to a grocery store and taste something that somebody else put their hands on.
Mm-hmm.
That's just reality. And then, so you're sitting here trying to, I don't want to say that vodka's an afterthought, but when you go to Texas and other places, there's 1,000 vodkas. So that's an even, you know, bigger mountain to climb. Although Specs has us, and they put us front and center, and they're carrying all the SKUs. So who knows? We'll see.
And we're definitely getting close on time, so I want to give you an opportunity. If there's anything we haven't talked about that you want to talk about, you tell me what, and we'll make sure we get to that. If not, I've got a couple more questions, and then we can wrap up for the day.
No, I think we've covered it. I mean, we've got a obsessively authentic brand. It compares to the finest bourbons in the world. Wouldn't be ashamed to put it anywhere, and rarely, if ever, has it. I mean, it's never failed a blind ever.
Mhm.
There are some people who, as you put it, maybe nerdy about it, and they know what it
Mhm.
is. They may not think they like it, but you put it in a blind, and or maybe. I mean, we could get off into the details of that, but
Mhm.
the the small batch is a everyday whiskey for everyday man. The high proof is 118, and it is sort of our answer to anybody who wants a single barrel but can't get one. So it's a blend of 15 barrels, and we put it out at basically cast strength. We didn't really talk about that one. It outsells everything else in Texas because they want higher proof there, I guess. And we have a single barrel program, and we have quite a few of those in Louisiana. We'll start to have more in Texas as the market develops. Next year, certainly many more. And then we have our vodka. We're actually producing rice vodka on our farm. And yes, it's actually a neutral grain spirit at 190 plus when we make it.
Mhm.
So I think I covered it all. And w- no, the 6 year, sorry.
Mhm.
We 6 year is a very mature, robust, covers the whole spectrum of palate, nose, and finish. We didn't talk about the finish on our whiskey. I mean, you can really get into that, but rice whiskey has, I mean, one of the best finishes you'll ever have.
Mhm.
There's no negatives to it. I mean, I don't think we want to go off, and we don't have enough time left to get into that. But next year, we'll see. We'll have an 8 year product, and we'll see if we like it. We'll see
Mhm.
if we're going to release it. It's going to be, by that time, the angel share will be such that, it'll be a very expensive whiskey, and it's not going to be the everyday whiskey for sure.
Right.
Yeah, we do some finishes and things like that, but those are
Mhm.
all people are asking for a bottled and bond.
Mhm.
Our small batch effectively is bottled and bond. We don't have that stated on the label, but it's
Mhm.
96 proof, and we meet all the criteria except 4 more points, which is easy to do. Just put less water. I don't know. Maybe we might do that next year. Offer a bottled and bond.
That'll definitely tickle the fancy of a bunch of whiskey nerds who,
Yeah.
they get real obsessed with that, and I get why, right? Because it's usually the kind of the first sign that a brand has been around for a while and they've been producing a good enough spirit. If you guys are releasing 6 and almost 8, you've already passed that. You've kind of met that minimum threshold. And honestly, as uneducated as most folks are about rice whiskey, does it mean the same thing for a bottled and bond rice whiskey as it opposed to a corn whiskey for them? Probably not, right? Because
Mhm.
they're still wrapping their brains around the fact that they like an aged rice whiskey as opposed to, I am a bourbon guy through and through. And I'll say this, I've had a number of single barrels from a lot of different groups from you guys. Every one of them has been phenomenal, and they always are crowd pleasers. And so it's a testament to the quality of work that you're doing, but it's also, kind of a testament to the hidden biases of all of the whiskey nerds who immediately think it's not going to be good. And then they're like, I'm really, really blown away by this. And
Right.
you're right. Give it to them in a blind, because all the whiskey nerds fear blinds, because it's going to point out your biases that exist inside your own brain that you say you don't have, but you actually do. And you'll find out these are some pretty phenomenal spirits.
Yeah.
Mike, I'm really, really appreciative of the time that you've given me today. You can't make more of it, and so you've got to find out about to run a brand, to run a farm, to run a family, all of the things that you've got going on. So I'm greatly appreciative for the time that you've given me today.
Well, we're greatly appreciative that you had us on. I mean, guys like you, retailers, they're all the lifeblood of the brand.
Mhm.
I'm sitting over here making the stuff, but we've got to have merchants who can merchandise and know how to offer the product, and people like you to talk about it to get the word out. By the way, back to you reminded me of something. We taste every single barrel, not every single barrel, all the barrels, and we rate them. And you have to retain a certain amount of your best whiskey for the backbone
Mhm.
of your regular small batch and cask strength. You can't just take all the best barrels, turn them into single barrels, and sell the leftover stuff. I guess you could, but that's not how we do it.
Yeah.
So, roughly 30% of the barrels we make are what I call qualified
Mhm.
as single barrels, and they're a 10 out of 10 in
Mhm.
all the ways that I rate them. Mostly the nose and the palate. I know what the finish is because they all finish the same. We put a lot of energy into that. That's we don't just I don't just have made enough whiskey. Just grab 10 barrels and throw it in the vat. We batch out every single batch, usually 15 gallon barrel, 15 barrel batches, and the only reason for that is because that's how much we could fit in the tank.
That was what I was going to ask. I imagine that usually this is the volume of the tank blending tank that we kind of have
Yeah.
available to us. I hate to cut this short. We're going to have another conversation sometime here in the
Okay.
next year because I've got to hop to a work obligation. Like I said,
All
thank you
right.
for hopping on and chatting with me.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. See you.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode from the Embellish Pod. If you enjoyed this, please leave me a review on whatever platform you're consuming this on. Leave a comment if at all possible. Hit me up on social media on TikTok or Instagram using @EmbellishPod, and you can give me a follow so you can keep up with what's going on here. I can also be found at www.embellishpod.com. It's all of my links, accounts, and contact details and whatnot. And so thanks for stopping by.